Welcome to Lecture 12 for Old Testament Historical Books. This lecture will cover Israel under foreign rule. Roman numeral 1. Judah is ruled by Egypt. Letter A. Judah makes Jehoahaz king. After his father Josiah died, Judah made Jehoahaz king when he was 23 years old. But he did evil in the sight of the Lord and only reigned for 3 months because Necho imprisoned him, began taxing Judah, and then, letter B, Necho makes Eliakim king of Judah. Necho, the king of Egypt, made Jehoahaz's brother Eliakim reign in his place after he was imprisoned, and he even changed his name to Jehoiakim. Jehoahaz ended up dying in Egypt, and while Eliakim was reigning in Judah, he gave silver and gold to Necho and collected taxes for him. Eliakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 11 years, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Roman numeral 2. Judah is ruled by Babylon. Letter A. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, imprisons Eliakim. After Babylon took over the land that Egypt had in Judah, Nebuchadnezzar came against Judah. This caused Eliakim to become his servant for 3 years. But when Eliakim tried to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar, many nations came against him, and Nebuchadnezzar imprisoned him and took him to Babylon, while also taking part of the vessels in the temple to be put on display in his palace. This is considered the first deportation of the Jews into the nation of Babylon. Letter B. Jehoiakim, also known as Jeconiah, also known as Coniah, reigns as the king of Judah. First, Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem. Jehoiakim was the son of Eliakim, and when he was 18 years old, he became the king. He reigned for only 3 months because Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city, and Jehoiakim gave himself up with his family and the officials. So Nebuchadnezzar took them and all the treasures of the temple as his prisoners. This was during the 8th year of his reign in Babylon. This was also foretold of by the Lord. This is considered the fall of Jerusalem, which occurred in 586 or 587 BC. Secondly, Nebuchadnezzar deports the people of Jerusalem. After taking the royal family from the city, Nebuchadnezzar then took all the leaders and citizens with him to Babylon except the poor. This is considered the second deportation. Letter C. Nebuchadnezzar makes Mattaniah, also known as Zedekiah, king of Judah. Number 1. Zedekiah rebels against Nebuchadnezzar. Mattaniah, or Zedekiah, was Jehoiakim's uncle who began his reign as the last king of Judah at 21 years old. He reigned for 11 years, and Nebuchadnezzar changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and neither he nor the people would listen to the prophet Jeremiah or the other prophets by turning to the Lord and not rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar. So the Lord sent his wrath upon the people. Secondly, Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple. In response to Zedekiah's rebellion, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem for about 1.5 years. Then Zedekiah tried to escape, but Nebuchadnezzar's men captured Zedekiah, killed his sons right in front of him, and then put out his eyes and took him prisoner to Babylon. After this, the men destroyed the temple and the walls of Jerusalem, and took the rest of the people in the city, except the poorest, as captives to Babylon. This is considered the third deportation. And thirdly, Nebuchadnezzar executes the high priest. The captain of the guard took Sariah the chief priest and Zephaniah the second priest with some others to Nebuchadnezzar, and the king killed them. Letter D. Nebuchadnezzar makes Gedaliah the governor of Judah. Number 1. Ishmael assassinates Gedaliah. Gedaliah was the son of Ahikam, who was a man who saved Jeremiah's life, and the grandson of Shaphan, the man mentioned who helped find the Torah in the temple during Josiah's reign. When Nebuchadnezzar appointed him as the governor, the captains and their men heard of it, and Ishmael, who was a commander and member of the royal family of Babylon, came to the city with his men and assassinated Gedaliah and the Jews and Babylonians with him when they were invited to a dinner party. Secondly, the people flee to Egypt. The remaining people in Jerusalem all fled to Egypt because they were afraid of the Chaldeans, which is another word for Babylonians. In this fleeing time, the prophet Jeremiah was also forced to go with them to Egypt. Letter E. Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, releases Jehoiakim. 37 years after Jehoiakim was imprisoned, the new king of Babylon, evil Merodach, whose name means servant of Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, released him from prison, gave him nice clothes, and fed him at the king's table regularly until he died. Roman numeral 3. Judah is ruled by Persia. Letter A. Cyrus, king of Persia, allows Judah to return to Jerusalem. Number 1. Cyrus decrees the temple to be rebuilt. In his first year as king of Persia, the Lord stirred up the heart of Cyrus to make a proclamation that the Lord had given him the kingdoms of the earth, and now he wanted him to build the Lord a house in Jerusalem. Anyone who wanted to go could, and he would even finance the project with his own money and send them back with what was taken by Nebuchadnezzar. Secondly, 50,000 Judeans return to Jerusalem. Technically, 49,897 of them left with Zerubbabel, their leader, Jeshua the priest, Nehemiah, and many others. Ezra chapter 2 lists that those numbers were in the household of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, who returned to live in their towns. And then it explains that some of the heads of the families gave free will offerings to help build the temple. Thirdly, Jeshua and Zerubbabel rebuild the altar. 7 months after they arrived in Judah, they rebuilt the altar according to the parameters laid out in the law of Moses. And after it was finished, they kept the daily burnt offerings, the regular offerings, and the appointed feasts of the Lord. But the foundation of the temple was not yet laid, so they gave money towards its building. Number 4. Zerubbabel and Jeshua lay the foundation of the temple. In the second year of being back in Judah, they worked with the Levites, 20 years old and upward, to lay the foundation. And when it was completed, they played music, sang responsively, and praised and gave thanks to the Lord. But the heads of the families who had seen the original temple wept loudly because they remembered the original foundation. Letter B. Artaxerxes, also known as Cambyses, the king of Persia, halts the rebuilding of the temple. Even though Ezra 4 calls him Artaxerxes, He is known in modern times as Cambyses, so as not to be confused with Artaxerxes I in Ezra chapter 7. Number 1. Samaritans oppress the temple construction. When the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, who we find out later were Samaritans, heard that they were there to rebuild the temple, they first pretended to want to help in the construction. But thankfully, Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the other leaders told them that they alone would do it as Cyrus commanded. After that tactic didn't work, the adversaries began discouraging the people from building the temple and even bribed people to counsel them not to finish their task. They continued this opposition throughout the reign of Cyrus, Cambyses, Darius, and even Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, Esther's own husband. Secondly, Rehum and Shimshai manipulate Cambyses. The Samaritan leaders wrote a letter to Cambyses telling him the dangers of allowing Jerusalem to rebuild. And then they challenged him to consult with the books of the records of his father to find out that Jerusalem was driven by sedition, a rebellious city, and hurtful to the kings. And thirdly, Cambyses decrees a cessation of temple building. In response to the Samaritans, the king wrote back and said that he had consulted the book of records and determined that the people of Jerusalem truly were rebellious and seditious. He then ordered them all to cease from building the temple immediately. Rehum and Shimshai immediately went to the Jews at Jerusalem and forced them to stop. And they stopped building until the second year of Darius, king of Persia. Then letter C. Darius, king of Persia, decrees temple construction to resume. Number 1. The governor questions Zerubbabel and Jeshua for restarting temple construction. After Haggai and Zechariah prophesied to the Jews in Judah, Zerubbabel and Jeshua began to rebuild the temple. Then Tattenai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and his associates came to question why they were doing this. They explained that they should search for the report that Cyrus told them to do this. Secondly, the governor writes a letter to Darius. In response to the Jews' claim that Cyrus decreed the temple's rebuilding and even helped finance the endeavor, they wrote to Darius and informed him of all that was going on there with rebuilding the temple and the Jews' claim. Thirdly, Darius decrees death to those who oppose temple construction. After searching the records and discovering Cyrus's decree during his first year reigning as a king of Persia, Darius wrote a letter to Tattenai the governor and his associates saying to let the Jews alone in their work, and the penalty to anyone who hindered them would be impalement on a beam from their own house, and their house to become a dunghill. Fourthly, the temple is completed and dedicated. This decree from Darius, in concert with the encouragement from Haggai and Zechariah, helped the elders build the temple, and after its completion, they dedicated it to the Lord with multiple sacrifices. In fact, number 5, the people of Israel keep the Passover. On the 14th day of the first month, as prescribed in the law of Moses, those returned exiles observed the Passover, also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for 7 days. Then the people were joyful. Letter D. Esther saves the Jews in Persia. One interesting aspect of this Old Testament book is that even though God's name or title is nowhere mentioned, his presence is on every page. While we are going through this final section of the text, make sure to take note of how God can be seen in the book of Esther. Number 1. Ahasuerus holds a feast. During the third year of his reign, and after a 180-day parade of his riches, Ahasuerus held an elaborate 7-day feast for all his officials and servants in his palace in Susa, the citadel. His wife, Queen Vashti, also held one for all the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. Secondly, Ahasuerus disposes Vashti. Letter A. Vashti refuses the king's command. On the seventh day of the feast, the king sent his servants to bring Vashti so he could show off her beauty. But she refused the king's command, which enraged Ahasuerus. Letter B. The king consults his wise men. The king's procedure before making decisions was to get counsel from those who were well versed in law and judgment. So he asked 7 wise men and 7 princes what should be done to Queen Vashti now that she had disobeyed the king. When they pointed out that she not only insulted the king, but all the officials present, and set a dangerous precedent to the other women in the land, they advised that she never be allowed to come before the king again, and her royal position be given to another that was better than she. The king was pleased with this counsel, so he decreed it and sent letters throughout all the provinces in every language. Thirdly, Ahasuerus chooses a new queen. Letter A. Ahasuerus holds a queen pageant. Almost 3 years after disposing Vashti, the king's servants convinced him to remarry by having beautiful young virgins brought from all over the land to be paraded in front of him to choose the one who pleased him the most. Letter B. Ahasuerus chooses Hadassah to be queen. After 1 year of purification for the young virgins, they were all presented to the king. But one in particular stood out above the rest and was loved by Ahasuerus more than any other. Her name was Hadassah, also known as Esther. Esther was the orphaned cousin of a man named Mordecai. Mordecai was carried away from Jerusalem with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, by Nebuchadnezzar, and he raised Hadassah as his own. But when Mordecai presented her before the king, he told her not to reveal who her people or her kindred were. Fourthly, Mordecai discovers a plan to assassinate Ahasuerus. One day, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance to the king's palace became angry with Ahasuerus and plotted to kill him. Mordecai reported this to Queen Esther, and after it was investigated by the king and found to be true, the 2 men were hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the Persian Book of Chronicles. Fifthly, Haman conspires against Mordecai and the Jews. Letter A. Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. Ahasuerus promoted Haman to the head of the officials, which was second in command. Haman was a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, who was captured by Saul and cut into pieces by Samuel. Haman commanded that all those at the king's gates bow down to him, but Mordecai refused to do this, so Haman decided to not just punish Mordecai, but to destroy all of his people throughout Persia as well. Letter B. Ahasuerus decrees the destruction of the Jews. During the first month and 12th year of Ahasuerus' reign, Haman convinced him to make a decree to kill all Jews because he claimed they were not keeping the king's laws and he should not tolerate them for that. Haman then commanded the scribes to write an edict and send it throughout all the land of Persia to kill every Jew, young and old, women and children, on the 13th day of the 12th month. Number 6. Mordecai mourns the coming destruction of the Jews. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, bitterly cried out loud, and fasted. All the Jews in Persia did this as well. When Esther learned of Mordecai's mourning, she sent clothes to him, but he refused to put them on. So she sent one of her eunuchs to question Mordecai as to what happened. Number 7. Mordecai convinces Esther to approach the king. Mordecai told the eunuch all that Haman had done, even his financing of the coming genocide, and gave him a copy of the decree to give to Esther with the instructions for her to approach the king to plead with him on their behalf. Esther explained that she had not been summoned to the king in 30 days, and the law was that if anyone approached the king in the inner court without being summoned, then the penalty was death, unless the king stretched out his golden scepter. Mordecai reasoned that she would be killed as well, since she was a Jew. But maybe she was the queen of Persia for such a time as this. So Esther told him to have all the Jews fast for 3 days, and she would approach the king. Number 8. Esther invites the king and Haman to a feast. On the 3rd day of their fast, Esther put on her royal robes, approached the king in the inner court, and found favor from the king by being allowed to touch the golden scepter. The king then asked Esther to request anything she wanted, even to the extent of half the kingdom. But Esther just asked for him and Haman to come to a feast she had prepared for the king. After Haman was fetched to come to the feast, and they were dining with her, the king asked Esther again to request whatever she wanted, even to the extent of half the kingdom. Yet again, Esther said she would make her request, but first asked if he and Haman would come again tomorrow for another feast. Number 9. Haman has gallows made to hang Mordecai. That night, Haman left Esther's feast so happy. But when he walked through the king's gate, Mordecai still refused to bow to him. So he became filled with wrath and pouted to his wife Zeresh and his friends about all he had. He had children, money, promotions, position, and even special favor with Esther's feasts. But it meant nothing if Mordecai still sat at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and his friends then told him to build gallows 75 feet tall, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. This made Haman happy, so he had the gallows made that very night. Number 10. Ahasuerus honors Mordecai. Letter A. The king is reminded of Mordecai's protection. That night the king could not sleep, so he had the chronicles brought and read before him. It was read how Mordecai had saved the king's life from the conspiring of the 2 eunuchs who sought to kill the king, but no honor or distinction had been given to Mordecai for this. Letter B. The king makes Haman honor Mordecai. After realizing that something should be done for Mordecai, The king had the only person in the court, Haman, come to him and asked him what should be done to the one whom the king wanted to honor. Haman thought he was referring to himself, so he told the king that he should put royal robes on the person, set him on a royal horse, and the most noble official should dress the man and lead him through the city, proclaiming, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then the king told Haman to do all that he said to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. And he did just that. Letter C. Haman mourns to his wife and friends. After being humiliated by parading Mordecai around the city square, Haman returned home, mourning to his wife Zeresh and his friends over what happened. They told him that Haman would not be able to overcome Mordecai, but Haman would surely fall down before him. And while they were talking to Haman, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring him to Esther's feast. Number 11. Esther holds a second feast for Ahasuerus and Haman. Letter A. Esther makes her request to the king. After the feast, when they were all drinking wine, the king asked Esther what her wish was, and he would give it to her even to the extent of half of his kingdom. But Esther said she requested that she and her people could live because they were about to be annihilated. King Ahasuerus then asked who would dare do this, and Esther said it was this wicked Haman, who was a foe and an enemy. Letter B. Haman is hanged on his own gallows. Esther's revelation to the king terrified Haman and greatly angered the king. So he left the room while Haman remained and begged Queen Esther for his life. When the king returned and he saw what he thought was Haman assaulting the queen while he was actually just begging for his life, the king's men put a covering over Haman's face, and one of the eunuchs said that they should hang him on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, who had saved the king. After they did that, the anger of the king was appeased. Number 12. Ahasuerus decrees the Jews can defend themselves. Letter A. Esther begs the king for protection. On the same day that Haman was hanged, Ahasuerus gave Haman's house to Esther. Esther revealed to the king her relationship to Mordecai. The king gave Mordecai his signet ring, making him second in command instead of Haman. And Esther set Mordecai over Haman's house. Then Esther tearfully approached the king again and begged him to avert the evil plan Haman set up. The king then told her to write whatever it pleased her with regard to the Jews and use his signet ring to seal it with the irrevocable seal of the Persians. Letter B. Mordecai has the edict written and delivered throughout Persia. The king's scribes were then summoned, and Mordecai had an edict written and hastily delivered throughout all Persia. This edict allowed all Jews to defend themselves and annihilate any army or person, children and women included, who tried to kill them on the day of Haman's edict. This was done this way because a decree could not be undone, but one could be made to counter the former. This was according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. The Jews rejoiced all throughout Persia when the edicts reached them, and some people even declared themselves to be Jews because they feared the Jews. Number 13. The Jews destroy their enemies. Letter A. They killed the 10 sons of Haman. When the 13th day of the 12th month came, the Jews throughout Persia gathered themselves together in their cities and killed anyone who opposed them. This was with the help of all the city leaders and officials because they feared Mordecai since he had grown more and more powerful. On that day, they killed 500 men in Susa, the capital, and also killed all 10 sons of Haman. But they did not take any plunder, even though the decree allowed it. Letter B. The king extends his decree. When word got to the king about how many people had died, including the sons of Haman, he told Queen Esther and said that she could make any request and it would be fulfilled. Esther's request was that he would decree that they could continue to defend themselves the next day and that the 10 sons of Haman would be hanged on the gallows. The king commanded it to be done, and 300 more men were killed in Susa the next day, but nothing was plundered. Letter C. Mordecai inaugurates the Feast of Purim. In total, the Jews ended up killing 75,000 enemies and set aside the 14th and 15th days of the 12th month to hold a feast of gladness throughout all Persia. In response to this, Mordecai sent letters throughout the land commanding that each year they would set aside the 14th to 15th days of the 12th month to celebrate their deliverance from wicked Haman and his decree. They named it Purim because Haman cast pur, which is another word for lots, against the Jews to destroy them. And this would be a continual commemoration of these days. It is then recorded that Queen Esther gave full written authority confirming Mordecai's letter about Purim and had them distributed throughout all of Persia. And number 14, Mordecai's greatness is remembered. This last chapter records that all the acts of Mordecai were recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia, because Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to the king and was great and popular amongst the Jews because he sought their welfare and spoke peace to them. Letter E. Artaxerxes, king of Persia, decrees another return to Jerusalem. Number 1. The king commissions Ezra to lead the Jews. Ezra was a descendant of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, and a skilled scribe in the law of Moses. He gained favor from Ahasuerus' son Artaxerxes and was given whatever he asked. During the 7th year of Artaxerxes' reign, he wrote a letter to Ezra decreeing that anyone from Israel who wanted to go to Jerusalem could do so with him. Additionally, number 2, the king finances Ezra's mission. The king and his 7 counselors sent Ezra with silver and gold that they donated so that he could purchase livestock and other items for sacrifice, with the understanding that if he needed any more money for the temple, then the king would give it out of his own treasury. The king then decreed that all provinces should contribute whatever Ezra needed for the temple, but no money would be allowed to be taken from those who served in the temple. Thirdly, the king commands Ezra to appoint judges and teach the laws of God. The king then told Ezra to teach all those who did not know the laws of God, and to appoint magistrates and judges who knew the law to enforce both the laws of God and the law of the king, under penalty of death, or banishment, or confiscation, or imprisonment. The writer ends this chapter by praising the Lord for putting all this in the heart of the king to beautify the temple. Number 4. Ezra travels to Jerusalem. Letter A. Ezra recruits the Levites. 1,386 men are counted as leaving Babylonia with Ezra. After gathering all the people by the river Ahava and camping there for 3 days, Ezra noticed that there were no sons of Levi. So he sent several men to get them from a leader named Iddo, and they returned with an unknown number of Levites in addition to the 220 temple servants to attend the Levites. Letter B. Ezra proclaims a fast. Ezra proclaimed a fast that they could humble themselves since he refused a military escort to Jerusalem because he claimed the Lord would protect them. Ezra then weighed out the silver and gold in the vessels given for the temple from the king and his counselors and gave it to 12 of the leading priests. Letter C. The people offer sacrifices. After this, they left the river Ahava to travel to Jerusalem, and the Lord delivered them from the hands of the enemy and from ambushes on the way. 4 days after they arrived in Jerusalem, the people offered burnt offerings to the Lord and delivered the king's commissions to the officials throughout the land. Fifthly, Ezra confronts the issue of intermarriage. Letter A. Ezra is informed about the intermarriage of the people with foreign nations. After arriving in the land and offering the sacrifices for the people, the officials approached Ezra and informed him that the people who arrived prior to his group, including priests and Levites, had intermarried with the nations in and around the land of Judah. When Ezra heard this, he tore his clothes, pulled out hair from his head and beard, fasted until the evening sacrifice, and then prayed a prayer of thanks to the Lord for blessing them in spite of their captivity, and then a confession for the people's forsaking of his commandments with their intermarriage with pagans. Letter B. Ezra assembles all the returned exiles. After Ezra's reaction and a prayer, a large assembly of men, women, and children came to Ezra, confessed their sin, and made an oath to put away their pagan wives and their children. Ezra then began fasting out of remorse and sent a proclamation throughout Judah that all returned exiles should assemble in Jerusalem within 3 days, or they would be excommunicated from the congregation. 3 days later, all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled in Jerusalem, trembling because of both fear of the matter and because it was raining heavily. And letter C, Ezra commands them to put away their foreign wives. Ezra addressed the assembly because they had brought guilt upon Israel by marrying foreign women, so they should make confession to the Lord and separate themselves from those wives. The assembly agreed with Ezra's plan of action, but asked if those who transgressed would be scheduled to meet with the judges since they were many and it was raining. Ezra selected heads of houses to examine the matter and specifically recorded those priests who married foreign women at the end of this chapter. Letter F. Artaxerxes, king of Persia, commissions rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Number 1. Hanani informs Nehemiah of Jerusalem's troubles. Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer, and during the 12th year of Artaxerxes' reign, his brother Hanani came to him with certain men of Judah and informed him that the people who returned from exile were in great trouble and shame, and the wall of Jerusalem was broken down and the gates destroyed by fire. After Nehemiah heard this, he began weeping and spent days mourning and fasting and prayed to the Lord that he would forgive his people and give success and grant Nehemiah mercy. Secondly, the king notices Nehemiah's sadness. 4 months later, Nehemiah was bringing the king his wine, and he noticed Nehemiah had a sad face, even though he had made sure to never be sad in the king's presence. When asked about it, Nehemiah silently prayed and then told the king about the city of his fathers lying in ruins and the gates being destroyed by fire. When the king asked him what he wanted to do, Nehemiah requested that he be allowed to go back and rebuild the city. The king agreed after Nehemiah told him when he would return, and sent letters to the governors in Judah to supply timber for the wall of the city and for the house he would live in. Thirdly, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem mock Nehemiah. When Nehemiah arrived in Judah with a military escort from the king, he delivered the king's letters to the governors of the land. But two foreigners occupying the land, named Sanballat and Tobiah, were very upset that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. 3 days after arriving in Jerusalem, Nehemiah snuck out at night with some men and went to inspect the walls and informed the men that they should rebuild the wall to protect them. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem heard of this, they made fun of them and accused them of rebelling against the king. Fourthly, the workers rebuild the gates of the city. This chapter is devoted to listing all those who took part in the rebuilding of the gates and beginning the wall construction. Those gates included the sheep gate, the fish gate, the horse gate, and all the others. Fifthly, Sanballat and Tobiah oppose the rebuilding. When they heard that the wall was being rebuilt, they became angry and plotted with the Samaritan army to fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion in the rebuild. But the Jews prayed to the Lord and set a guard as protection against them day and night. Number 6. The workers rebuild while armed. Even though the people were frightened, Nehemiah addressed the leaders and told them not to be afraid of them and remember the Lord and fight for their family and their homes. On account of all this, every worker kept a sword on their right hip, and while half of the people worked to rebuild the wall, the other half stood with spears from morning until night. Number 7, Nehemiah rules generously as governor. Letter A. He rebukes the nobles and officials for charging interest during a famine. On account of the famine in the land, people were having to mortgage off their fields and property just to get grain. And because some could not pay back their debts, they were being forced to be slaves to their own people. When Nehemiah heard of this, he was very angry and brought charges against the nobles and officials for exacting interest from the people and demanded that they return any interest that had been exacted. Letter B. He refused to collect a governor's allowance from the people. 8 years after being sent from Susa to Jerusalem, Nehemiah became the governor of the land of Judah and held that position for 12 years. But even though the governor's allowance of food was supposed to come from the people, Nehemiah refused to collect it from them, since previous governors extorted them, and it would have been a burden on the people. Also, because Nehemiah feared the Lord. Number 8. The wall of Jerusalem is completed. Letter A. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem conspire to assassinate Nehemiah. After they found out that all of the wall was completed except for the doors and the gates, they sent 4 letters to Nehemiah trying to get him to meet with them so they could harm him. But each time he sent word back that he refused to stop the work to meet with them. The 5th letter they sent to Nehemiah then claimed that he and the Jews were trying to rebel against the king and proclaim Nehemiah as the king of Judah in order to scare all the people. But Nehemiah wrote back that all those claims were false. Letter B. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem hire Shemaiah to give Nehemiah false counsel. When Nehemiah met with Shemaiah for counsel, he said that they should go to the temple and lock themselves in there because his enemies were coming that night to kill him. But Nehemiah said he would not run away, and then the Lord allowed him to realize that God had not sent him, but he had been hired to scare him into committing sin by fleeing and scaring the people. Letter C. The wall is completed in 52 days. This chapter ends by declaring that it took them 52 days to complete the wall, and when it was completed, all the nations around them were afraid since they realized the work was done with the help of the Lord. Unfortunately, many of the nobles of Judah corresponded with Tobiah since they were bound by oath to him because he married a Jew, and Tobiah tried to make the nobles afraid. Number 9. Hanani and Hananiah are placed in charge of Jerusalem. When the walls were finished and the doors were installed in the gates, Nehemiah placed his brother Hanani and a man named Hananiah, who was the commander of the castle, in charge of the city because he claimed his brother was more faithful and God fearing than many. This was also presumably done because Nehemiah promised the king he would come back at an appointed time. This chapter then ends with Nehemiah finding the list of the almost 50,000 people who came out of exile with Zerubbabel during the first return after the Lord moved in him to perform his own genealogy. Number 10. Ezra reads the law of Moses to the people. The people gathered together in the city square and told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses to read it in front of them on a wooden platform they had made for this very purpose. When he opened the book, the people stood and bowed their faces to the ground while he read it for the entire day. When the day ended, the people began to weep. But Nehemiah, Ezra, and the Levites said to stop weeping because it was a holy day and they should go rejoicing and eat and drink. Number 11. The people observe the Feast of Booths. On the second day, when Ezra was to read the book of Moses, they found where it was written that a feast of booths should be observed during the seventh month, which was the same month Ezra was reading the law to them. Then they announced it to all the people that they should assemble and observe the feast for 7 days, while Ezra read the law each day. Number 12. The people confessed their sins and praised the Lord. 24 days later, the people were fasting in sackcloth with dirt on their heads, and for a quarter of the day Ezra read the law, and a quarter of the day they confessed their sins to the Lord, and then praised him for all he had done for them in choosing Abraham, delivering them from Egypt, and showing their people mercy when they rebelled against him. Number 13. The people sign a covenant with the Lord. This chapter lists those who sealed their names to the covenant and then writes out the obligations of the covenant to walk in the law of Moses, to not intermarry with foreign nations, to not make purchases on the Sabbath, to not plow the fields on the seventh year, and many more. Basically, this was bullet points directly from the Torah. Number 14. Lots are cast to see who will live in Jerusalem. The leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, but the rest of the people lived in other villages. So they cast lots to bring in one out of every 10 people to live there. Number 15. The wall of Jerusalem is dedicated to the Lord. After the listing of priests and Levites that went with Zerubbabel and were remaining during the days of Nehemiah and Ezra is given, we find that all the Levites were brought to Jerusalem from all their places in Judah in order to celebrate the dedication with song, music, and sacrifices so loud that their joy was heard far away. On that day, men were appointed over the various service responsibilities in the temple as required by the law of Moses. Number 16. The people are reminded of the Ammonite and Moabite treachery. On the day they dedicated the wall to the Lord, the book of Moses was read, and they heard that it was written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter into the assembly of God because they hired Balaam against them. They did this to curse them instead of meeting them peacefully with bread and water. Number 17. Nehemiah issues his final reforms. Letter A. Tobiah is thrown out of the temple. At some point, Nehemiah returned back to Susa to the king because he says that he asked leave from Artaxerxes during the 32nd year of his reign, which was 20 years after the first time he left. Upon his arrival, he discovered that one of the high priest's relatives, Tobiah, had been allowed to have his own room in the temple where some holy artifacts belonged. This caused Nehemiah to become angry, and he gave orders to have everything thrown out and the proper vessels returned to the room. Letter B. Nehemiah reinstitutes the Levites' portions. Nehemiah also discovered upon his arrival that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them. This caused him to confront the officials about this and required that the tithe of food be brought into the storehouse and individuals be appointed over the treasures in the storehouse to be distributed. Letter C. Nehemiah sanctifies the Sabbath. Nehemiah noticed on the Sabbath that people were treading the winepress and bringing in crops. So he confronted the nobles of Judah, asked them why they were doing this evil thing on the Sabbath, and told them to stop it. He also commanded that the gates be closed and kept shut on the Sabbath so that no load could be brought in. And when he saw the merchants sitting outside the gates, he told them not to lodge there again, or he would lay hands on them. And finally, letter D. Nehemiah confronts their intermarriage. Nehemiah also noticed that many of the Jews married foreign women, and half of the children no longer even spoke Hebrew. This caused him to confront them, even beat some of them, and had them make an oath not to marry their children to the other nations. One of the high priest's grandsons even married a daughter of Sanballat, so Nehemiah chased him away from his presence. That brings us to the end of Lecture 12 for Old Testament historical books.